Hey everyone, it's Dion with Racers360. Today we'll be breaking down Road America, one of my personal favorites. And I think if you talk to most drivers, it's pretty high up there on their list. High speeds, high commitment, big brake zones, great overtaking opportunities. And I gotta say, the town of Elkhart Lake is awesome. Lots of cool stuff to do away from the racetrack. If you're going there, make sure you go to Seepkins. The history there is great. The drinks are great. And it's part of the deal, right? You just gotta go out there. So I would say without further ado, let's start breaking down Road America. So the first reference point that I want to point out here is actually one that matters a little bit more in the wet, but it's just worth pointing out because Road America, you're going to get a decent amount of rain. So a pretty decent reference point for our brake zone for turn one in the rain is going to be the end of the pit wall here. Now, again, in the wet, things can vary drastically. If it's just sprinkling, you'll be going way past this. If it's really heavy rain and you're at a lower horsepower car, you'll still probably be going past this. Like a Spec Miata is probably going past this, no problem. But for anyone in those higher horsepower cars, a little bit lower grip, it's a pretty decent reference point. Even if you're going past it, it helps to have an idea of where this is so that you kind of have a good idea where you are on the racetrack. Just wanted to point that out. But let's switch back and start talking more about the dry here. So for the turn one brake zone in the dry, the access road on our left-hand side here is going to be the best reference point here. Now, for those of you in downforce, kind of open wheel style cars or lower horsepower cars like a Spec Miata, Spec B car, we'll be going decently past the end of this access road. But it's still going to be a good reference point for you to know kind of where you are. You won't be going much farther than this, so it's still in the range. For anyone that's going to be kind of a little bit higher horsepower cars, maybe somewhat lower grip, you know, we might be getting down to the start of this access road on our left-hand side. So that's going to be our best brake zone reference point. This will be where the large majority of cars are working towards the brake. You can see here in this GT3 car with downforce, I was braking right here. So about half a car length to a car length past the end of that access road, and that's in a 600 horsepower car with a lot of downforce and slick tires and a lot of grip. So I'm still not going much further than that. So what really matters in turn one is it's sort of a balanced corner. It's not an entry speed corner. It's not a pure exit speed corner. It's very much balanced. So we really want a hard hit of the initial brakes, but we want to be starting to work off of that heavy brake pressure pretty early on so we can roll in that speed. You can see here the next little reference point, and I'll be honest, this isn't something that I see while I'm driving, but if you want to go back and do self-review on your own video, and maybe even on a solo lap, get a sighting picture, you'll see right about the start of this curb here, I'm going to be starting to bend it in towards this first apex. Now, again, when I'm in the car, I didn't even know this existed. My eyes are looking in for this apex right now and even for the exit curb, but it just helps point out something so that you can, again, self-evaluate a little bit here. So starting to bend it in, and it's a nice slow turn-in because we're really rolling in speed. So we have to really be slow with our hands. Typically, it's going to be a fourth gear. Some cars will be a third gear corner, but oftentimes third gear will cause me to overslow. Again, totally dependent on your type of car. I've even driven some cars where it's actually a fifth gear corner, but that's with a 7 gear or gearbox. So can really depend, but most of the time fourth or third gear. And you can see here, our next reference point is we're not quite apexing at the very start of this curve, but we're pretty close to it. And you can see we really want to call our apex, I would say, right about here. So just a little bit before we get to this gray concrete patch, we're on the curb. But the big things, the really important thing here is we need our eyes picked up and we're looking for that exit already here. So we're starting to come in. My initial throttle application spot comes right here, right as I get to the start of this concrete curve. That's where I want to be starting to apply the throttle and starting to get ready to open my hands and use the track on exit. You can see already I'm applying the throttle, and notice how I'm starting to go away from that apex curb little by little by little. So I'm definitely not still on the curb by the end of it. I see a lot of drivers still hugging the curb. That often means their eyes are too low, not opening their hands early enough. So I'm out here, I'm running wide. Now this next part sort of depends on the rules of the organization you're with. This weekend, we were allowed to be 2 tires all the way over the curb, and as long as our inside tires weren't over the white line, we were legal. So you can see I'm using every inch of what's available. I don't really want to use much more than this. So this is kind of what I would say is optimum. Yes, it's a little bit bumpy here. The same sort of curbs exist here, exit turn 5, exit turn 8, and Canada corner. But we still want to use a little bit of them, or in some cases, a lot of them. So when you're really on it, let the car come out, be wide here, and then slowly work it back to where you're on the normal line. So turn 3, obviously here, we are leading on to a long straightaway all the way down to turn 5. So getting a good exit really matters. And we know to get a good exit, what really matters is how early can I get back to full throttle after the apex point. So that's what we're really focused on. So a good brake zone indicator, there are obviously these number signs here on the left-hand side. But to be honest with you, this 200 board's a little bit hard to see because I want my eyes looking into the apex already. Like I'm picking up my turning point in my peripheral vision, and I've kind of got my focus vision starting to head towards the apex already. So really what I almost use is the end of this wall here on the left-hand side. It's almost like it goes from narrow to being more open. It doesn't look as obvious as on video, but when you're driving it, you do have this subtle feeling of openness starting to expand. And I'm sort of flat for a little bit longer after the end of it, and then I'm starting to apply the brakes. But again, that's a bit of a reference point that you can use to start to time in your brake zone. Typically, the brake zone's gonna be right about that 200 board, or yeah, about that 200 board is sort of where we want to be going. See if we can see it here on my video. I'm about just inside the 200 board, about the 180 or something like that. So that's going to be our range. Again, we want a hard hit of the initial brakes, but we want to start to release off of that brake pressure so that we can keep some brake pressure on. We want to be really trail braking. The road compresses right about here. So this may seem like it's an early turning point, but because the road compresses, because we grip up, and because we can trail brake, we can get away with a little bit earlier turning point and actually still rolling pretty decent entry speed. The exit is the more important thing, but you'll be able to roll more speed than you think through turn 3. So notice again, I'm not apexing the start of this painted curb here. That would be too early, but I'm not apexing that much later than it either. So I would say we're apexing right about here, about the middle of the curb, and only once I'm ready to start unwinding the steering wheel do I want to get back to throttle. No earlier than that. So right about here, I'm getting back to a throttle, getting back to aggressive throttle, and once again, I want my eyes picked up to the exit curb back in here, because I want you starting to unwind that steering wheel as early as possible. Use every inch of the road. So trying to get back to full throttle before we get out to this exit curb. Using this exit curb, the one important note is there's a pretty big divot that usually exists at the end here that we want to try to avoid. So I want you out over here, but be diligent about working it back onto the racetrack, because that can tear up some race cars. If it's not always there, but it's quite often that the ground gets picked up and it could be a pretty large drop. So again, now we're definitely back to full throttle. We've got to launch all the way down to turn 5. Make sure here, focusing on your breath, relaxing your hands, getting ready for turn 5. Big brake zone, great overtaking opportunity here. So into the turn 5 brake zone, I like to try and make it as straight as possible. So coming pretty close to the inside here, this second line, actually, let me get rid of this. It's, the inside tires are probably going to be more something like here. It's sort of the line that we want to look. So I don't get all the way down to the inside, but if you're defending position, as long as you're proactive with your defend, go down the inside of the brake zone here. Make someone go around the outside. It's a pretty easy corner to defend your position in. Obviously, if you're going down the inside, you're going to have to brake a little bit earlier because you're going to be off the racing line. But force someone to go to the outside here. And again, if you're overtaking, this is a great opportunity to do this where you can fade to the outside here and then come back to the inside. Or you can make it work around the outside of this corner as well, but it's more difficult. So we want to be on a fast line. Notice how I'm not all the way to the outside of the track. I'm not all the way to the inside of the track, but my car is pretty much looking straight towards the outside of the racetrack. I want to make this brake zone as straight as possible. the best braking markers are, again, up here on this wall. That's the 400 board. That's the 300 board. I would say most cars are braking anywhere from just before the 400 board. And if you're in a, pretty low horsepower, high grip car, you're working down towards that 300 board. It's going to be probably the right range for most cars. So braking in a straight line. Let's see here if we can see my brake zone. Again, GT3 car, high grip. I think it's hard to see sometimes. It's slow motion. Let's see if we can see it. Right about that 250 here in this type of car. And this is about as late as I ever broke, and we've got really good ABS as well. So you can see the ultimate here is about the 250. I don't think many cars are braking much deeper than that. Most cars, again, are probably going to be back to around the 300 board. But once again, see how my hands are straight? I'm braking towards the outside of the racetrack, Right about here, I'm aligned myself all the way to the outside, and I've brake hard. You're holding that heavy brake pressure for a little bit longer here. Be wary. If you're in a car without ABS, it's pretty easy to lock up front tires as the road really crests. So if you're in a car without ABS, you might need to brake a little bit earlier so that you can start to release off of that heavy brake pressure as you crest, and then you might actually want to add it again as the road compresses here. Now we're getting ready to turn in. Decently early turn-in point. Definitely starting to turn in before this darker asphalt, which is higher grip than everything else. We're still trail braking, coming off the brakes. Notice how I'm apexing pretty much the start of this concrete curb, and my initial throttle application spot's right about here. Again, as I'm ready to start unwinding the steering wheel, that's where I want to get the throttle, and I want to be aggressive to throttle here. So waiting. Getting aggressive to throttle. See, I'm starting to unwind the steering wheel. I want to be back to full throttle by about now. And again, similar to turn 1, using this curb, working it back. So turn 6, I think, is actually one of the more difficult corners in this racetrack. It's awkward because right as you're turning in, the road crests and it's easy to lose the rear. So it's one of those corners that you have to experiment with. Typically, I'm braking a little bit early, and I'm releasing off of those brakes and being super light on the brakes, or even coasting for a little bit, because the less brake pressure you have as you turn in and the road crests, typically the less oversteer you're going to have. It's really the combination of the cresting of the road and the weight on the front end that trail braking causes that'll make that rear end come around. So braking somewhere before this bridge, you can see I'm braking about here. There's no really great reference points for a brake zone. Just try to time it so that as you come up over the hill, and you can see just as pretty much as the rear of my car gets to the end of the bridge, that's where I'm starting my turning point. So right about a car length past the end of the bridge, just about another car length before the start of this black or darker pavement is my turning point. I'm trying to come off the brakes right about now, so I'm super light on the brake pressure. And I'm really slow with my hands until the car sort of lands on the other side of this crest, and that's when I turn more aggressively. So you can see here slower motion as I'm pretty, like the car is turning in slowly, and then right about now where the whole car lands, look how I crank in the wheel. So you definitely want to be turn, wait, and then turn more aggressively. Again, apexing about the start of that concrete curb on the inside. That's our throttle spot. Get those eyes up. You let the car be free. I actually like to use a little bit more exit curb than this. But then you have to hustle it back to turn 7 here. You've got to be really aggressive getting it back before turn 7. Turn 7, again, is sort of a balanced corner, a little bit more of an entry speed corner, but the exit still matters because there's a long run down to turn 8, and that's another big brake zone, but good overtaking opportunity for us. So back to the left-hand side by just about the start of this curve. And for most cars, this is going to be a super light brake zone. You might be able to get away with just a lift. So super light on the brakes in here. High speed corners, we want to get our speed reduction done a little bit earlier. Coming in, coasting. It's okay to coast. I'm coasting. Notice how I'm coming up. You can use this concrete curb. I am typically a driver that uses a little bit less curbs or a little bit less aggressive on curbs than others. So notice how I don't really use much of the concrete one, but my initial throttle application zone comes right in here. And then I'm using every inch of the road on exit. Just be aware, especially in the wet, we know that paint is super slippery. And at Road America, almost all of the curbs are painted, especially this one. It's really easy to get out here on the wet, and it'll shoot you back to the inside really, really fast. So we definitely don't want to touch this in the wet. But in the dry, use every inch of it. Just make sure that, you know, some curbs can kind of catch the car a little bit. You might have to be a little bit aggressive coming back to the right-hand side. Preparing for turn 8. Once again, brake markers here on our right-hand side. Most cars I race, I'm looking for about the 200 board as my brake zone. So we come down here, 300 board. Let's see right about now. Let's see. We can see that initial brake zone. So just about the 210 board, 220s where I was braking this weekend. Anywhere between the 200 board and 300 board is probably going to be where most cars are braking. Again, we come back to this higher grip, darker asphalt here, which means you can really come off and reduce your brake pressure and roll more speed than you think. You've just come through turn 6, turn 5, lower speed corners. This is going to be similar to turn 5, though, where you can really reduce your brake pressure, and that extra grip really helps the car turn. So I'm hard on the brakes, I'm reducing a ton of brake pressure, and I'm super light on the brakes by now. See, again, I'm turning in about a car length before that darker asphalt, so the front end's heading towards it. Once again, I'm apexing about the start of that concrete curb, and there's a little bit of camber in here as well, so you really want to get your left front wheel on that painted curb. I don't like to use the concrete curb, but I'm kissing it. In that little bit of compression, aggressive the throttle, using not as much curb on exit, but still every little bit of the road. But then again, similar to exit turn 6, hustle that car back for the carousel. So the carousel is probably where I see the most consistent amount of mistakes. It's easy, because it's intimidating corner, to come in and start to lift back in here and just kind of put your way all the way through on maintenance throttle. What we want to see, because we know we don't want that maintenance throttle. Maintenance throttle is a negative. We want to drive it in harder. I'm full throttle, I'm full throttle, I'm full throttle. I'm starting to release off, starting to release off, starting to release off. I want to try to drive it down to this grass with enough speed so the car starts to understeer off that white line just a little bit more than I've even done here. So right about now, it's not much. It's probably a third of a car width, so I'm definitely not using all of the road, but I want to drive it aggressively until I get down to that first bit of grass, full, starting to release, apex in the grass here, and when I've brought enough speed in, I can now come off the throttle, coast, the car's going to understeer, and now I'm patient. I've brought in enough speed to where I can coast, which allows more weight to get on the front end so that I can get a little bit more rotation in here. And when I get this right, as the car starts to come back to the inside here, I'm starting to get to throttle, and then I'm back to full throttle roughly in this range here. When you spend a long time on maintenance throttle, you never get that rotation to get the right angle of car exit. So when you drive it in less aggressively, you come off that throttle and you spend a lot of time on maintenance throttle, you're going to have more understeer in here. You're going to have more understeer, and you're going to have a tough time getting the car pointed in the right direction and back to full throttle here. So that means you're probably only getting back to full throttle way out over here. So if that's you, try to more aggressively work the throttle into the corner, come off the throttle, be patient, and get back to full throttle. Really try to maximize time spent at full throttle in this corner. So now coming up for probably the most intimidating corner in nearly all of North America, the kink at Road America. It's, again, speed manipulation. Our decrease of speed needs to be done early, so we're not going to be really trail braking deep into this corner. So I'm usually braking right about the 200 board here, anywhere from the start of this, roughly the start of this curbing, to about the distance side of the 200 boards, where most of the time we're going to be reducing speed. By about our turning point, about the 100 board here, I want to be pretty much off the brakes for the most part, coasting, initial throttle as I get down to this curb. So I'm not on throttle way earlier. Yes, in high-speed corners, I'm okay with a little bit of throttle slightly earlier. In a traditional corner, I'd be on throttle about now. So you can see I'm only on throttle an extra 2 or 3 car lengths earlier. I'm not back on throttle at the turning point. So coasting down, nice and calm. Just know, we want to start to settle the rear. Little bit of throttle, get those eyes up, use every little bit of the road. Super high commitment place here, and obviously not much room for error. So slowly work up to it here at the kink. This is not a corner to really be trying to maximize from lap one. If you ever happen to drop tires here, as with anything, when we start to drop tires, the most important thing to know is get your hands straight and come slowly release off that throttle and ride it out. It's still going to be a ride, and you're still going to have to do some work. But where you get in bigger trouble is when you try to quickly get back on the track when you're on throttle. The car can often hook to the inside. So this is a corner where if I get it wrong and I'm going wide on exit, I'm giving up. I'm saying I'm not even going to try to save the minimum amount of time. I'm getting those hands straight. I'm coming off the throttle. And if I lose 2 seconds, if I lose 5 seconds, that's okay. Live to fight another day, because this is a corner that can really bite you in the ass. So coming back, getting ready for Canada corner, kind of nice coming out and wide over here, setting up for the brake zone. Again, our brake markers are here on the left-hand side. The 400 board is going to be the best reference point for most brake zones. You're going to be coming straight, and right about that 400 boards where I'm braking in nearly all cars. Again, some cars a little bit deeper, some cars a little bit earlier, but roughly in this zone, see how my hands are straight? I'm braking along the outside of the racetrack. In this car, yeah, okay, I got a little bit deeper, right? Probably about in here. But most cars, that 400 board. Canada corner, pretty much a little bit more of an exit speed corner, but still pretty balanced. No great turning point reference. It's more going to be depth perception. And once again, what's my apex point? Hey, it's going to be pretty much the start of that concrete curb. There's a theme around Road America in these style corners. Notice that Canada corner doesn't have that darker pavement, that higher grip pavement. So it's easy to come in with a little bit too much speed here comparatively like to turn 5 and turn 8. You don't have that extra grip here that you do there. Initial throttle spot right about here, using every little bit of the road on exit. Notice again, almost to the white line with my inside tires, working it back for Billy Mitchell. So again, I want to already be back to the outside of the road here. At Billy Mitchell, total entry speed corner. I'm trying to roll as much speed over the top of the hill as possible. Obviously, it's blind, so you got to slowly work up to it, but entry speed corner. So most cars, it's going to be a super light brake zone or even just a lift. So in this car, it's just a lift, but most of the time, I'm, again, making that speed reduction a little bit earlier in high-speed corners. So a little bit in here, coming off, I'm coasting, turning point here, about a car length before the end of the curb on our right-hand side. Coasting, 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 apexing just past the start of the curb here, and this is my initial throttle application spot. And you should almost feel like you're trying to lift up in the seat, looking over the hill, trying to find that exit curb with your eyes, letting it come wide. Once you get comfortable, use a little bit of this curb, but again, it takes a lot of laps to just start to trust where the car is. And as soon as we're on exit, you're hustling the car back to the left-hand side of the road, because getting a good exit out of turn 14 is one of the most important things to get a good lap around Road America. So typically our brake zone is going to start just past the signage here as we get pretty close to the darker curb. So you can see I'm about, I don't know, 3 car lengths, 4 car lengths past that sign before I'm braking. No great markers, so I really use that signage and then get a feel for how long can I hold it flat to find my brake zone. Yes, there are number boards out over here. I've never seen these once as I'm driving, because my eyes are looking in for the turning point and starting to look in for the apex pretty much already. So if you're seeing those number boards, probably is actually not a good sign. So braking, getting lighter on the brakes, light on the brakes, light on the brakes. What's really important to turn 14 is patience to throttle and a slow turning point. So again, we're leading onto a long straightaway. So what's important? Getting back to full throttle as early as possible after the apex. So we want to only start to apply the throttle as we're ready to unwind the steering wheel. So turning point here, roughly about the end of the curb on our left-hand side, nice slow turn-in. And you can see here, I sort of missed the apex a little bit. You can definitely see, you want to be almost in the grass right about here and using this curb. You can actually see the grass has been made muddy here from cars coming in and just kind of mowing it a little bit. So I missed it by just a little bit. Whoops, went back too much, but that matters. So I want to be an extra half tire width on this curb. That's my initial throttle application spot. And most importantly here, I'm working it back to full throttle as early as possible, which means I have to be unwinding the steering wheel as much as possible, which means I'm using every inch of the road out over here. Look at that. You couldn't use any more than that. And I want to be back to full throttle by about now, before I get out to this exit curb, because as I get back to full throttle, the better run I'm going to get onto the front straight away. So that's been the Racers 360 track breakdown of Road America. Hope you enjoyed it. Best of luck. You know, if we could do anything for you, we'd love to help you. Taking it to the next level of personalized coaching, especially at Road America, is really important. There's quite wide ranges between cars on brake zones, on turning points, on throttle points. So this is the right guide to study to get ready. But if you really want to take it to the next level, we hope that you will send us your video. We'd love to work with you with any of our coaches. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out, team@racers360.com. We're here for you. Best of luck. Enjoy it. It's a lot of fun out over here.